Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thanks so much for spending part of your day with us. We really appreciate it. Before we dive in, quick intro on me and what brought this conversation to life. My name is Chris Hendricks. I'm a co-founder and head of partnerships at Boon, and we're an affordable employee growth platform that helps companies support talent development in a personalized and scalable way. Whether it's developing high potential managers or coordinating one-on-one group coaching sessions or personalized one-on-one coaching sessions. We work as the right hand to HR and talent development for teams around the world. We work with close to 100 organizations, and we're talking about one of the most common challenges we hear in today's market, which is talent development matters, but how do we actually get budget and buy-in to do it right? And so that's exactly why we're here today. You're going to hear from a few folks that who have been leading the charge at their organizations. We're going to see it from a few different angles, both people, programs, and from finance. So I'm really excited to learn alongside you. To start off, I'm going to have our panelists do a quick introductions before we dive into some questions. And if you have anything you'd like us to cover, feel free to drop it in the Q&A or the chat. But yeah, really excited for you to be here today. Jay, I'll kick it off with you.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. Phenomenal intro. I'm Jay Kantar. I'm the Executive Director for Talent Development and Inclusion at TBWA Media Arts Lab. We are Apple's bespoke global creative agency. We're responsible for Apple's creative work across 7 global geos and 26 markets. Happy to be here, Chris.
Thanks, Jay.
Hi.
Sadika, do you want to go next?
Yes. Oh, you said my name right. I will say my name right too then. My name is Sadika Lamad. I am the VP of People at Vidyard. Vidyard is it's powered by like a video sales agent. It's a go-to market sales tool. We just launched our, AI avatars and super exciting time to be there. And I run all things people within the organization. I actually haven't always been in HR, but I sort of accidentally fell into the world of strategic talent development like 2 organizations ago. And then that's what sort of thrusted me into all things people, and very excited to be here today.
Amazing. And Sean, last but not
Great.
least.
Wow. Thank you for having me today. So I'm Sean McSherry. I'm the SVP and Head of Finance at Indeed. Hopefully people know Indeed. If not, I need to talk to our marketing department. So let me know. I've been at Indeed actually for 13 years. I started when we were really small. Only about 200 people were at the company when I joined. So it's been pretty crazy to help build the company, not from the ground up, but from an early floor, let's say. And so I love helping people grow. So I'm excited to be here and talk about it.
Amazing. Always helpful when you have that finance buy-in to some of the strategic conversations. So glad to hear that you're in the camp of supporting growth for your org. I'm going to launch a quick poll, and while we start to get some of the responses, I would love to hear and do like a quick lightning round. What's one L&D initiative that surprised you with its impact? Maybe we can go similar that we did with the intros.
Okay, so I'm assuming that's me. Internal coaching. When I joined Mal, we had no coaching programs, and we started an internal coaching program where I was the internal coach, and it was incredible seeing the impact and the value of diving deep to unpacking personal and professional growth at individual level. And then what we did is we took individual coaching and cascaded it to team coaching, and it had a huge impact in terms of how we come together and we celebrate the work and how we work together as an agency. So a program that is internal within the walls of our agency is internal coaching, and it has been very impactful in terms of leveraging learning and a strong sense of coming together.
Helpful. Sadika.
Yes. So mine was a couple companies ago, but it's starting like an internal mentorship program. It started like very early on when we were a smaller startup, and just more like casual grassroots, like just it was a great way to like, connect folks from across the business, especially at the time we were in management consulting and in DC area. So not everybody was co-located. Some folks were sitting on client sites, et cetera. So it started like very grassroots without a real formal structure. And then very quickly turned into something with like a lot more structure, focused on like real, same thing, sort of coaching, mentorship, connection, learning together, and like upward feedback, downward feedback. It was very shocking how much we learned from, and we were able to connect with the younger folks in the organization. and what we got out of that in terms of what drove like other areas of investment around people. But I'm also just surprised at how much it was pretty inexpensive to run. And even though it didn't have the most formal structure for a little while, folks still loved it, and it like they still were drawn to it. And just goes to show like you don't always need to have something like super well planned out. It doesn't have to have like all the bells and whistles. It's okay to pilot something small and test and learn and iterate over time. It still can have just as much impact than like some bigger program that has all the budget in the world. So that would be my example.
I'm glad. Sean, how about you?
Apologies. One program that we did that I really liked is a top talent program where every executive, every leader was able to choose a number of people from their orgs. And it wasn't supposed to just be the people who got the best performance ratings. So it's supposed to be the people that you thought could be the leaders in the future, right? So you're thinking about like future CFOs, future controllers. And we were able to identify them, and we created a program for them, a kind of bespoke program for this. It ended up being about 100 people. We brought them all together for 2 different sessions. We got them coaching and 360s. So we did like a before and after. And I thought it was really impactful. The people who did it tended to stay with us longer. They tended to get promoted at higher rates, which is partially because we thought they were high potential people to begin with. But I also think was some of the impact. And then the important thing there for me always is that you could measure it, because you could see before and after. You can understand what the 360 was like before, what the 360 was like after, and then how did the impact of mentorship, of coaching, of the things that we provided, like what impact did that have on the employee? And so it's very tangible. It's a very easy thing to quantify from my perspective.
And that'll be interesting relative to what I'm seeing on this first poll. So excited to dive into that. Okay, other lightning question. What's one metric you think is overrated and one matters more than people realize?
Okay, I'm glad I'm going to be the first before someone steals that from me. It's attendance. To me, we place such a high value on what is the cost per learner program for talent development, or what is the level of engagement in the learning and development programs. And I do believe that there's great value in having a large audience. And of course, it impacts the bottom line when you have a large number or a large cohort of people. But there are certain programs in which we learn best in small groups, and there's value in intimacy, and there's value in creating learning that is bespoke, that is tailored, that is individualized to the person, to the talent, to their growth, to their career map. So to me, the obsession with how many people attended the session is something we need to reconsider. There's sometimes value in providing generic learning where a certain lab is open to everyone. And yes, high engagement is great value. But there's also great importance of us saying that should not always be the case. There are certain programs in which actually, if we have a small number of people coming together, it creates a certain level of come together and a certain level of learning that does not happen when it's large groups. It also means the learning becomes more learner-centric than facilitator-centric, because we're learning from each other, and now we have room and time to explore how is it that we can find a common denominator of learning. So there's great value in thinking about attendance as a double-edged sword. Sometimes it helps in terms of financial purposes because a larger cohort means cheaper cost per learner, but sometimes in terms of quality of learning, it's good for us to look at intimate learning cohorts, especially when we are diving into leadership growth, leadership development, or when we're diving into behavioral competencies.
Awesome. It was very thorough, Jay. I originally was going to just do like a metric in broader HR, which I hate the time to fill metric within recruitment because I feel like it values speed of hiring versus quality of hiring. I just think there's a better metric that's a little bit more all-encompassing on like what we're really trying to get at. But if I were to go down the path of L&D, it's probably along a similar vein to what Jay's saying, but like course completion rates, like doesn't really mean anything to me, honestly, because just because you've completed the course doesn't necessarily tell me if you've actually how you've consumed that information, and are you actually going to like did you even pay attention during that whole session? And to me, I think a better use of that would be like, okay, you've gone through the course, now what does like application look like? What does the application rate look like? Some observable sort of traits or metrics would be like the behavior change, or like with that behavior change, did it drive better business KPIs that we're measuring? Like, did their performance change, and then their measurable outcomes of like, or their OKRs, did that change? Like, it's more, I don't think like attending this session is necessarily like any of those metrics surrounding that is really going to tell you the complete picture, nor is it really going to tell the story to someone like Sean to make a case for future L&D investments, because he's going to make, well, it didn't change anything on the business side, so who cares if they came to the training? See, a little plug for you, Sean.
Yeah, well, I 100% agree. Like, and I really prefer to think of L&D like there's required courses, and then there's opportunities you're providing people to learn. And so attendance in a required course is not something that I really care too much for. What I do care for is engagement in optional courses. And so like we've had various learning development platforms over time, and I loved getting the usage statistics because you'd see the people who had like done a little bit of work, and they'd see the person or people, it was usually a small percentage of the population though, who would really like was really trying to learn. And those people like you want to invest in, and those are the platforms that like you can find the most value in if they're providing opportunities for people to continue to learn things that they want. And those are the statistics I look at when I'm looking at, ROI. Is okay, if this platform is good, then people should be using it for more than just the absolute bare minimum.
Totally agree with that.
Yeah, 100%. All right. Well, I'm going to share the results really quick. Really interesting to see, and I think I had an error in this. But the two most prevalent talent development challenges, one is no clear ROI or data. The other one is budget's been cut or frozen. And so those are kind of the two main themes that it seems like are challenging people in today's market. So I'm excited to dive into how we think about framing it, given that those are two of the big challenges. Sarika, let's start with you. When you're building a business case for L&D, what framing has landed with execs and finance teams?
Yeah, it's a great first question, especially given the feedback we just got from the audience. I would say this is L&D, but I would also say this is like the people team or the people function as a whole is finding ways to frame L&D as a business enabler rather than just like a cost center or an expense, right? And I feel like the best way to be able to do that is you're positioning that L&D investment first and foremost, always aligning it to what the business priorities are. What is the business trying to achieve in this fiscal year, in this quarter, in the next couple of quarters? Like if you can tie what you're investing in or what you're asking for the investment for L&D, that it's going to help us drive X, Y, and Z outcomes that are like tied back to our business plan, that generally generally perks up the ears of an executive team. I think I do understand that finding the ROI in L&D sometimes is where the challenge is, and like knowing what to measure, because if you don't measure it, it doesn't matter, right? And like because that's the case that you're going to make for like, this is the ROI I'm going to get, and this is how I'm going to show you the ROI. I'm going to measure it over along this cadence and tie this ROI to actual dollars and cents. That is always a challenge in trying to figure out like the articulation of like why you invest in that, but that is a very powerful set of metrics and data. And then tying that obviously back to why that particular L&D investment. I also think you have to make it measurable and iterative. And I know we'll talk about this a little bit later in some of the other follow-on questions we're going to talk about, but like also being willing to open to pilots, right? And so like, hey, this might cost us this much, but like what I'm going to do to prove the ROI, especially if you don't have that data up front, but you're making an assumption based on a set of like different inputs of what you're seeing inside of the business. So like, while I know I'm going to need this much money, but while I know we don't have this today, here's what I recommend. I'm going to do this small pilot. Here's how I'm going to do it. Here's what I'm going to measure. And here's what I think it's going to prove this assumption correct. And if I'm able to do that, and I'm able to prove X, then you're going to buy into giving me this much, this investment. And here's how I would go execute that. I've had to do that. In fact, that's how I found my way into sort of strategic talent development was like, I saw a bunch of gaps in the business that was growing pretty rapidly and then acquiring companies on top of that. And I said, okay, fine, don't give me a team. I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. I'm going to do this in this entire calendar year. And if I do X, Y, and Z and I measure it by A, B, and C, you need to let me hire a team of people. And here's how I would structure that team. And they're like, okay. I was like, I don't need resources today. I'm going to use cross-functional resources and just like pure grit at that point. But I believe in it. And if I do this, and you have to let me go do it. And I did it. And they let me build a team. I was able to, not right away. I brought in like, a head every quarter for that, so I probably brought in like 4 people over the course of like a year and a half. But that's how you got to do it. You got to take out like a small bite of the elephant at a time to make that investment.
Yeah. And main takeaway that I heard is you had really specific framing. You had a clear path to ROI, what this would look like, and you made it feel light to start with the potential for investment if you're able to prove it.
Yeah, if you don't have the ROI data up front, like folks in this room have, said, I don't always have that. A pilot would be a really great way to sort of test an assumption that you're making, that if this, then that, and it'll drive this business outcome. That's a great way to test it out without really like a ton of investment up front.
100%. So Sean, that was a pretty specific ask. And that's the point of this panel, but I'd love to hear your perspective when you start, like when you're hearing pitches on budget for talent development, how many are hearing that are too vague, or like how could HR and talent development leaders present it to you in a little bit of a better format?
So I'd say actually our L&D team is pretty good. I'm like very thankful that I get to work with some really strong leaders. So, and they know me because I've been working there for a long time. So I think they know what I like and what I want. So I'd say that actually the core L&D team is very good at everything Sarika just said, right? Like is establishing what problem they're trying to solve and a hypothesis for how they could solve it. And usually coming with some small request with, that they know will target a small group of people, and then they can measure it and then they can decide whether to roll it out. So they're very good at that. I think everything Sarika said was 100% spot on with how to get it done. I would say that I get a lot more kind of some sub L&D proposals from business units where they're trying to target something maybe more specific. And those tend to be more vague. And if you'll pardon me, just being a little bit less disciplined, I would say. And the key always to me, and again, I'm just going to repeat a little bit what Sarika said, is what problem you're trying to solve and like how you think you're going to solve it and how you're going to measure it. If you have the hypothesis clearly laid out and you have how you're going to measure success defined before you start, that's the most important thing for me, right? I mean, of course, the money as well, but if you haven't thought it out properly and you're not sure how you're tackling the problem and what problem you're tackling, you're never going to succeed. And I've seen plenty of proposals where we were trying to target a specific element of like a specific problem within the company. Like we're trying to target something that we think will help impact an engagement score in particular, and we've fallen flat on our faces. I've seen times where we had tremendous impact. But it's okay to fail. You just have to know exactly what you're trying to solve for and, have a really thought out process for how you're going to do it.
Yeah. And that's a plug in there. You bring up a really solid point in your particular organization. When you go to the business units and they're making the case for an investment, particularly around L&D, it's not always as disciplined, right? And that is like also a big plug for like leverage your HR teams, leverage your HR business partners, and business partners should be entrenched in the business units. And when like the way that we have it, I mean, we're a smaller company, but even in my larger companies, business partners are entrenched in various units such that they get real smart on what's going on in those business units. And then they become a partner to the business units. Like, hey, that ain't going to fly with Sean. Like, I can tell you right now, like, here's how you should position it. That way, like they're getting better. It's like, it's its own learning in that moment because I'm coaching you on because I know how Sean or how finance is going to look at this, and they're being coached on how to present a proposal in a more impactful and effective way. But then also it's like way more efficient to be able to partner with your HR leader and then go to Sean and then not have him review something like this isn't it. Right. So like, it's sort of like a learning on the job learning kind of built into that type of methodology. And I love that. I like to hear that your L&D team is so dialed in though to the way that you like to get that type of proposal.
It's really important.
Jay, you're on mute.
Jay, you're on mute.
It's very interesting. I actually think Sean is outnumbered in this panel. So most probably Sean is thinking we need 2 CFOs and 2 TD people on the call versus 1 CFO and 2 TD people on the call. So I can feel Sean going through the emotions of I have 3 TD people on the call versus 1 CFO.
I love it. Well, I'm going to switch gears a little bit, given what we saw on wanting more information on how to show clear ROI and data. And Jay, I'm going to start with you on this one. I know you have a few talent development initiatives at Mal right now, having worked with you guys for a while. What are some of the data and outcomes that you've been able to glean from different programs that you run that help your program stick or expand?
Oh, that is interesting. I'd say impact metrics. And this is not at Mal. In my old job, we had very strict KPIs. and we used them as a benchmark. And it was ideal because it helped us track outcomes like promotion rates, turnover, improved engagement. So they were very specific and they were easy for us to track and pull. And it helped us show how TD programs reduce succession gaps or increase internal mobility, which was ideal for us to actually be able to present. There were very clear KPIs and very clear indicators, and we had them on a continuous monthly roll. And it was easy for them to demonstrate savings. Hey, we saved on external hires by, or we saved on recruitment by, or we saved on turnover costs by. And I think that is incredibly valuable. So the ability to have very clear KPIs, and that becomes the language that you speak to the execs. And it also helps them prep and helps them see and helps make the invisible visible in terms of makes it a bit more tangible. But if there's one thing I've learned is, and I'm going to say, please do not make this a robotic exercise. Try your very best to combine data with some form of storytelling. I know the focus is on ROI and how do we talk about ROI, but once you find a framework that is KPI focused, I would really encourage you to say, if data makes the case, personal stories make it stick. So it really adds having the individual human element to the ROI of what you do. Speak about who has been promoted, their story at your company, the impact of coaching and learning on transforming lives, on creating new pathways. For example, we have an employee who went through coaching and transitioned from a finance employee to an art and print producer. Her story is very personal, but it shows how the company's dedication to internal mobility and growth and even career transition. And valuable storytelling is personal and is more impactful. So if you're going to be talking data, please talk about the human behind the data. So I like to call it the two N's. The first N is N for numbers. The second N is N for narrative. When you're presenting the numbers, make sure there's a narrative behind the numbers. Numbers is the data, narrative is the story.
Very, very helpful. And I think that leads to a question for Sean, which is built around 38% of the panel here said that their budgets are being cut or that they're frozen. So from a finance lens, like how do you think about that more broadly, and what are certain red flags in a funding request that you see, and what makes you feel confident in the narrative or the numbers of the ROI that is being presented to you?
Yeah, I mean, budgets have certainly been tight for the last year or so, and I don't expect that's going to change too much for most companies in the near future. So I think it means you got to get a little scrappy at times and figure out the best ways to get it done. Overall, like this is the biggest red flag is going to be the stuff we already talked about. If you're not thinking about how you're going to measure and hypothesizing how you're going to impact, that's going to always be hard. Like I prefer to think of the L&D department as like the marketing department. And for marketing, like they're coming for an investment and it's very disciplined in how they're asking, how they're measuring, what the timeline is, how like it is super detailed and makes it very easy for finance to prioritize the ROI. That's the way an L&D, to some extent, budget request should be. It's like, we believe this is going to have X impact and articulate for the finance team, like what that means to the company. Are you trying to drive better performance? Are you trying to drive better retention? Are you trying to drive down certain costs in other areas? Especially like right now, a lot of what we're seeing is a lot of L&D requests for AI, like AI training, which is really interesting because it's still fairly new. And I feel like people are still struggling a little bit with how to quantify it. But to me, like the AI investment should be, if we're doing this, we should find some way to make X person's job, 5% faster. And if you can multiply that by 11,000 people, that's a lot of productivity you've just gained. So the red flag to me is not thinking about what the impact of the business is in some form of numeric term. And to me, the green flag is always going to be having that clear hypothesis and measurement established beforehand, and then regular check-ins on how it's proceeding.
Yeah, and I think something that you can think, like AI is obviously a huge component of how orgs are growing and thinking about leveraging tools to make their employees more efficient, right? And I think Some of the biggest pain points and challenges we hear today from a talent development perspective is around making managers better at supporting their people so that can unlock more capacity for their employees that are working with them. So similar to, making a narrative around what's actually going to move the needle, try to use performance reporting as a way to figure out who needs additional development. But I think having that quantifiable story is really important.
Yeah, I mean, and sometimes in some instances, it may not be to get the investment dollars, you may have to try something that's a little more bootstrapped, right? Like Chris and I talked the other day for AI, like for finance, for my own department. I have to be very critical of my own L&D requests, right? I can't go approve my own budgets. And so we're trying to come up with an AI training platform that actually is really simple because I'm convinced that a huge number of people in the organization just don't know where to start. They just don't, they're a little bit scared and they don't quite know how to start using AI. So the proposal is actually a training that's literally just 10 people for 5 minutes showing the organization how they've used AI, how it's improved their job, and like where they started. And it's actually really pretty simple. It's free, essentially, but I think it's going to have a big impact. And I think that we will start seeing it in AI usage statistics and in people's productivity pretty fast. And that might enable us to maybe get some more bespoke AI training if we have the utilization to prove that we're kind of taking the right steps.
I love that, Sean. And you've brought up such an important point that like not all L&D has to cost money. And like you said, there is a lot of bootstrapping. I mean, also the power of AI also lets you bootstrap and do things a lot, easier and not having to always pay for content. You can kind of build it yourself. But that's such an important point. And what I'm learning, even when we've done different types of learning mechanisms, is especially now, like a lot of our employees want to learn from each other and almost in like cohorts, but they also just want to learn by hearing what other people are doing. And so like even folks sharing in a Slack channel, like we, created like a AI wins and successes, or whatever learning Slack channel. It's like, hey, I used ChatGPT today to do this, this, and this. Did you know you could do this? And here's the prompt that I used. And like people are just learning by people just throwing in takes a few minutes to write up a Slack. And then it's also in our R&D department, they obviously started using AI a lot faster because they saw like just such a notable productivity lift with code writing and all of that. So they started using it, probably a year ago at this point. The numbers are pretty amazing in terms of the lift and leverage and the productivity gains we've seen and the outcomes that it's driven for our R&D team in particular. But you would think, I thought, is a common misconception is like, oh yeah, if you're a developer, you probably love AI. No, it's actually not the case at all. In some cases, they're some of the most resistant is what I'm learning. And so they've even done some grassroots things where they just done lunch and learns. People just grab their own lunch. And because we're a remote first company, people jump on a Zoom together and folks are learning by use cases. Like, hey, I use this, this, and this. I use Claude for this. I use ChatGPT for this. I've learned this is better for this and this is better for that. It's 30-minute lunch and learn. And I mean, what we've seen is like confidence within AI has grown from like a 1 to like probably a 3.5. There's more enablement we need to be doing like writ large in the organization. But we've seen like usage on like a weekly basis go from, a year ago in the first month or after the first quarter of AI coming out and using it to like 12% usage on a weekly basis to 97% on a weekly basis. And then furthermore, you're going to see what the notable outcomes have come. And like, it's been pretty interesting to observe. And like, they did it without it being like a company thing. It's very grassroots, but that just goes to show like bootstrapping, and that didn't cost us any money. We didn't send out gift cards for lunches. It's just like, hey, you want to come and learn, and this is going to be your requirements at some point. And so if it's going to help you do your job better and faster, why not? So I would encourage folks, HR folks on this call to like think creatively and think about like what's at your fingertips for free.
Yeah, I wish I could triple tap into how Indeed is measuring productivity from an AI perspective. And I'd be so curious to hear, Sarika, how are you measuring AI utilization? Is that like a self-report or is that like an engagement survey that you all are doing?
It's what they call like a developer experience survey that they do, and they measure that on a quarterly basis. And it's a set of it's self-reported, and it's a set of questions that are being that developers are being asked, and then also like in that they're also detailing the notable like this is what like outcomes, like business outcomes I've actually been able to achieve because of this. So it's not just like, yeah, I'm using it, and then there's like no measure and or connection to like, well, what is it actually doing for the product and like what you're developing. So, but it is like it's almost like its own engagement score, but just specific for developers, a very specific developer set of questions.
Yeah, makes
I'm still
sense.
learning a lot, and I'm running this whole
Yeah,
in
yeah, I
there.
know.
Right? I'm myself, I'm learning a lot on like, you're not going to have one measurement or one metric or KPI that's ties to the whole organization the same. And so part of what we've been talked about actually just coming out of an executive meeting this morning is like each functional area is probably going to have their own metric or set of metrics that we're going to be tracking. Like what they do in revenue is going to look different than what they're doing on the developer side because their business outcomes and what they're driving to in their day-to-day are different. And so it's also trying to figure out what does that look like for every function in the business, and then how does that then translate up to like notable dollar, improvement overall in the business, whether it be revenue, whether it be costs. So that's a little bit of what I'm trying to figure out myself right now.
Yeah, I'd love, you know, from a larger company like Indeed to a smaller company like Vidyard, both of you are thinking about bootstrapping certain initiatives and finding low-cost ways to make a really outsized impact. So I'd be curious, and another theme that I've heard both in our prep call and on this webinar today is pilots. It sounds like it's been something that's had outsized return. Jay, I would love to hear your vantage point on how pilots have worked, how you've thought about integrating them within the org, and what they've led to.
Yeah, huge fan of pilots. And it very much aligns to what is being said is how can you start specific programs without the crazy hefty price tag? So pilots are a great conduit for playing around and learning what would work for you without actually the crazy cost structure that comes with launching very big from the very start. So they're budget friendly. They allow you to learn fast. They also allow you to test with minimal risk. I feel like when you go to the execs and you're trying to get buy-in in very big programs, the first question is, what is the risk associated? What is the price tag? What is the commitment over the many years? So pilots are phenomenal because they are able to provide you with a soft start without the risk, and they provide you with great data that you can then use as a proof point to secure buy-in. So when you pilot after 3-4 months, you go like, hey, this is what we're seeing. This is what people are saying. This is the impact of what has been done. And you can tell a better story because you have an applied story versus a theoretical story. So again, big programs can feel a bit risky. They can definitely overwhelm. They require long-term commitment. So to me, it is ideal to start small, a small cohort, a flexible contract, a small commitment. I guess it's like, hey, before committing to a 3-year car lease, let's drive the car for a day. And super quick story. And Chris, you're going to love that story because it's a Boon story. We piloted with Boon, I think, 4 years ago now, right? Yeah. And I think back then, 4 years ago, I almost gave you a heart attack. I was like, this guy does not like me because I was so difficult, because I had so many questions, because I was concerned if we're going to launch Boon on scale, what is going to be the cost, the impact? How do we know? And I didn't trust you because I didn't know you back then, right? So we started and we did a pilot with Boon 4 years ago, and we just did it for the LA office. So one location, small group of learners, strictly LA, and it was more or less like pay as you go. Contract was super flexible, and Chris allowed me an exit at any time, which was great for me to sell for the executive team. And because of the low stakes, the pilot was approved quick and it was super easy. And when we proved successful, we started expanding. And it's been 4 years since the pilot. And now we run 2 Boon programs, right? We run Boon Grow and we run Boon Scale. And we run it across multiple geographies. We have our senior leadership program and we have our all talent program. And we're running it in the US, Canada, Miami, Mexico, Brazil, Australia, Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam, India. So I do believe that when you pilot with purpose, feel free to play with it. Start small because it's super easy. Pilot first, scale after. And again, they're great small win in the now, but they open great doors for the later. So to me, If there's one win that you can secure in the now, if there's something that you feel is a good fit for you, play with it. Take it, do it in pilot format, and then explore what would it look like if you go on scale.
Thanks for sharing that story.
It's a
Thanks for
great
that
story.
story. Appreciate it. Sean, something that made me chuckle inside is that the finance team can't even approve their own budget. I would love to hear your viewpoint on, hey, this hasn't been budgeted. How should HR or talent development leaders think about that? What should they actually hear? Is there room to think about reprioritizing budget or shifting things around from your vantage point and what you see across your team?
Yeah, I mean, it's not budgeted. People should understand that as there's no incremental money to fund it. There's no free money. You have to find the money somewhere. But if you can prove the ROI, then the hope always would be that there's something else that's lower ROI that can be deprioritized to fund something that's higher ROI. Right? Like that's essentially what finance and what organizations should be doing all day long is deprioritizing things that are not working and prioritizing things that are working. So it doesn't mean that there's no opportunity to do it, but it means you've got to be smart about how you're going to approach it, and you've got to be very clear on what you're going to get for it. I also think that the pilots help with that because it's much easier to say there's no budget for $1 million than it is for $20,000. There's always room or a way to find $20,000. $1 million is a lot harder. And Jay was using the example of like driving a leased car before you buy it. Like it's almost like you want to drive 5 different cars before you buy it. Like because it's the piloting also allows you to try different things before you settle on the right path. So I think people should hear it as I've got to be creative and I got to be smart and I got to make sure that I dot the I's and cross the T's on what the impact's going to be.
Yeah, I could not agree more. And I feel like getting some of those ROI metrics, figuring out what the use case is, and being able to craft that story um, just seems like a really natural fit for um, bringing in some of these employee growth tools for the resources. I'm going to pivot a little bit and I'm going to launch another poll on um, what is the hardest talent development to get funded at different organizations right now. So I just launched that. But Sarika, while we start to get some answers, I would like to think a little bit more about like today's environment. What are some of the main talent needs that you're seeing? Are there emerging areas where you're excited about? It sounds like AI is one of them. But how have you thought about adapting your program to meet different expectations that are happening today?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think manager development as just like a broader topical area of focus continues to be an area that we need to continue to focus on. I know probably hear that from a lot of HR leaders. And we've tried different things that I don't know has always landed. And I think it's also hard being remote first. I'm just noting like when I got into talent development and like I really fell in love with this art of learning and development, I realized was more when we were in person in an office, like pre-COVID era. Building high potential leadership program and getting so much buy-in and people, a lot more connection, easier for mentorship because the in-person component did make that easier. And then also people just learn by osmosis. It's a lot harder and it makes L&D sometimes just really challenging to do this in a remote environment. And how do you get people to stay engaged and like really know and understand like that they're taking from like they're actually learning and like processing the information you're giving them and like also trying to find a way to like have people connect via a Zoom screen or insert your choice of tool that you use. I think that's probably been the hardest challenge that we've had going to this remote era. I think in terms of like while manager development is still a big focal area, I think yes, AI. I'm learning this myself in the organization. I think everyone thinks that AI is going to solve everything. They just throw a tool at it or just use some ChatGPT and like business outcomes will come. Like it doesn't work like that. It's such a change management and a like heavy transformation that brings its own level of like learning and development with that because it's also like managers have to help drive the usage of AI or how to use AI, when not to use AI. And it's not just AI. it's like looking at your business differently. It's looking at how we work differently. It's you may not need AI for everything. It's automation, it's efficiency, but we are finding the same thing that Sean's already noticed within Indeed is folks just don't know where to start. And also folks don't have a lot of time. And this era of efficiency we've like been in with SaaS in particular in over the last year and a half has made teams a lot leaner, and I think folks are taking on a lot more and they're not having time for L&D. So I like Sean messages like this micro learning, like how do you give them bite-sized learning? How do you bring the fun back into the learning as well? How do people process like learning can happen on the job, and like how do we make that, like how do we bring learning into the flow of work a little bit easier, where people are realizing that they are learning by the things that they're doing day to day. So yes, one area that we're looking at is like AI automation, right? How do you think about your work differently? How do I teach you prompts that lunch and learns? That's how we probably pivoted, is like we were doing this like manager semester series that were like 90 minutes once a month, and it was like content, but then it was also like, okay, cohort learning and scenario based. People liked it, but we're still getting people like, I don't have time. And so now what I'm having to pivot and understand is like, okay, with a limited time, and I need them to understand how to leverage AI, how to create more time in their, in the work that they're doing, is like, how do I create these like micro learnings, these bite-sized learnings that are inexpensive, but like and people are taking like little pieces of things that are going to help them in their day to day. And then how do I also give people space and time to experiment in their day-to-day environment? It starts by even giving some of these folks a license. Not everybody has a license, and I certainly don't want you using a free of anything, because it's taking our proprietary, that's also the other element, is like teaching people like what you can and can't put inside of, any of these like Gen AI tools. I know I went a bunch of different ways, but I think micro learning in the flow of work or fun, like lunch and learn type things, is where we've really, really tried to pivot towards. And solving for like not just the manager, but the employees as well. They felt like they were lost. Like they're like, well, you're only focused on management, you're not focusing on us. So we've opened the aperture a little bit of how do we get some of that micro-sized learning to employees as well.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more with Sarika. We're seeing I think there are three very clear trends in the TD space right now. One is skills and competency-based everything. Competency mapping. How do I develop my talent using a very clear competency framework, and one that links to career progression and growth. And I really do believe that your people want to know, and they deserve to know, what are the skills and competencies required for the job, and how does the training that you provide align to their competency growth? So your people do not want performance reviews anymore. What they want is they want to know, what does my growth look like? And they want clear, transparent competency maps that they can follow in terms of the learning and development space. The second trend that is quite big in the space is coaching. Learning is no longer happening in training rooms, and it's no longer happening in classes, but it has really become the power of unpacking your individual potential with your dedicated coach. And it's funny because I remember coaching was for the executives. Like back in the day, we used the term executive coaching or leadership coaching because coaching was strictly for execs. Today, we're starting to see coaching as a learning solution, something available for all. And I really do believe there's so much growth in understanding what are my behavioral limitations. For years, we've been told learning is a social phenomenon, and learning happens in groups, and it still holds true. But now we are also seeing that learning happens at an individual one-on-one level, learning with your coach as a thought partner in growth. And that is, to me, a very big redirection of how we speak about talent development and growth at agency level. And it is less generic and more personalized. And the last trend that we're seeing, which I think is very big, is personalized just-in-time learning. I guess the best way to say it is demand for bite-sized, in-the-moment learning via a mobile app or a digital platform. The age of podcasts, I guess, is where we're at today. Very similar to what Sarika said, like, hey, what is being discussed on Slack? What are people talking about on their social media stories? I remember a few years ago, the big trend was, the buzzword was gamification of learning. And now today it's the TikToking of learning. How do we take learning and make it in something that's bite-sized and that is individual? And I guess maybe the last thing, and it's less of a trend and more of a vehicle, I think, is AI. And it's huge. And I want to think about AI as a vehicle or a method for learning. And what I mean by that is, for example, you can today build your own avatar coach. Imagine building your own coach. You plug in what is your behavioral profile. For example, I'm a collaborator, I'm an introvert, or I'm an extrovert. You plug in your demographics. What do you look like? Your job function, your responsibility, your seniority, your challenges, your areas of growth. And then you choose a coaching style, something that works for you. For example, I like hard love. Someone else might want gentle and paced. It depends, right? And you choose a voice or a theme, or let's say your inspiration. For example, I don't know, I'm a big fan of Adam Grant or Brene Brown or Mel Robbins or, Simon Sinek. And AI generates an avatar coach that is bespoke you. And that is the power of AI. I mean, it is not that coaching is no longer valuable. It's not that coaching is no longer a talent development solution. It's now we're using AI as a tool or as a vehicle for coaching. And that is just an example to what's possible when we use AI as a vehicle for learning. So there's just so much that is happening. And of course, I think all of that are things that we are thinking, how do we take what we see as trends and how do we make sure that the trends are reflected in what we do at our agencies and organizations?
I love this micro learning concept that I've heard from both of you. And when I was debriefing with Sean as well, this is something that he brought up was decentralization and hybrid work have made talent development so much harder. Um, how is Indeed thinking about doing talent development, employee growth, given some of the challenges that you're seeing?
Well, I think the way I'm thinking about it is it's really hard. As you said, it is so much more difficult. I mean, Sarika was saying earlier, like you learn through osmosis, I think was what you said, right? They're just from being around. You don't get that in the same way anymore. And it's also a different challenge for different stages of the career. I think it's particularly challenging from my perspective to people early in their career where it's harder. They can't just ask the person sitting next to them how to do something. You have to Slack someone, get on a Zoom. It's a lot harder than it used to be. But I also see the challenges for people all along the different elements of their career path. It is harder than it used to be. It's also more essential probably than it used to be. It is not, there is no like one size fits all. Jay was talking a little bit about everybody likes different things. Everyone's going to respond and train to different environments. I think that's where we have to be as flexible as possible in our programs. If your program is too rigid, I think you'll potentially lose people. People won't participate or won't get anything from it. So the hard part there is a lot of it relies on the managers. You have to have strong managers who can listen and learn and adapt their strategies to individual employee strategies. And that's hard. It's a hard thing to teach and it's a hard thing to screen for. So lots of difficulties. I wish I had the answer. I think we're still all trying to figure it out. But the most important thing is that the answer is going to be different for everybody.
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting to see the polling data, where I asked what type of talent development is hardest for people to get approved. Number one was company-wide training, which feels like the most rigid solution, where it's how many people can you get there? Second was manager development, and third was executive coaching. So I think there still is a lot of buy-in for executives getting access to coach to navigate some of these really challenging landscape concerns that we've seen across the economy. All right. Well, I think if anyone has any questions, feel free to put it in the Q&A field.
There's a question
Yes.
in the chat box that came in for Jay.
I see that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know you use a few different coaching modalities, Jay, so it may be worth for you talk about how do you engage with coaches for the team, or what different types of tools do you use?
I love that. Kristen, so it is, we have a three-pronged approach to coaching, actually maybe even four. So our exec have their own executive coaching tools, and we work with an executive coach who understands who we are as an agency and then tailors their coaching approach to the vision and mission of what is Media Arts Lab. And then for the we work with Boon as a third-party service provider, and we feel like this is very beneficial because it creates a certain level of trust in the system when we have a coach that is a third-party service provider. It's not someone within the walls of the agency who's coaching you, it's someone outside the walls of the agency that's coaching you. And there's a certain level of trust in the system. And Boon is incredible because who gets coached is invisible to me, but I get to understand what are the themes that our people are being coached on. And then we take these themes and we see how is it that we can design learning and development programs to address some of these themes when there are large common denominators of topics that we want to speak about. And the last approach that we do from a coaching standpoint is we have internal coaching, and we use different frameworks for coaching. So we focus on behavioral coaching, which is predictive index, which is really cool because we speak about what is your behavior. If you are a chemical, how do you respond to other chemicals? How do you respond to other people? How do you respond to the container that contains you? And then we take the individual coaching and cascade it to team coaching. So we look at what happens when we come together as chemicals. When I mix these 5, 7, 8 chemicals in a container, what tends to happen? How can we turn tension to magic? So we have the internal coaching arm, we have the Boon third-party service provider arm, and we have the executive coaching arm of what we do in the coaching space. And with Boon, what we've done as well is we've went with 2 different programs. So we have a bespoke leadership development program under Boon, and then we have a scale program for all our talent under Boon. So literally 3 programs, and each program splits into 2 different options. And it's been incredible seeing the results of what happens when you dive deep with your talent and you provide them resources and tools and provide them with a thought partner of what could happen that, or maybe less of, how do I say this? Less focus on what can go wrong and more focus on what can go right. And I think this is something that you are unable to address in a generic learning hall of 40 people, but it's something that you can definitely address when you dive deep with the individual as a person. I hope I was able to answer your question.
No, I think you definitely did. A lot of different ways that you're supporting employees on helping their development and shaping the ways that people interact and engage. So it's love to see Mal so invested in your people. Last question, because I haven't seen any come in through the Q&A. As you think about getting executive buy-in and having some internal advocacy for some of your talent development initiatives, what does buy-in actually look like for all of you within your companies?
Whew.
What does it look like right now?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a little chaotic. I'm not gonna lie. Generally, I would say how it's working for us is, I mean, it's probably a little bit of what I've already articulated at the top of the session is, what I or my team are observing gaps in the business as it relates to particular business priorities. We use our own version of an OKR methodology to prioritize the business, and in a lot of cases, we're finding gaps even just through that. Like our whole I say it's automation and AI, but I actually think it's probably more like workforce efficiency and enablement, and AI and automation are just potential tools or outcomes truly. But even going through this exercise, I'm learning a lot about where we have gaps in the business and where we might focus on better enablement or change management. And that takes, training and enablement. So again, I try to look at where we're seeing gaps and tying L&D proposals. We've really adopted more of this, the Amazonian way of building a doc ahead of time, to be able to articulate, this is the objective I'm trying to solve for. Here's the outcomes I'm trying to get at. Here's my proposal. Here's how I might go about doing this. And I'm going to try a pilot. Here's what I need, right? I try to put the proposal down, 2 pages or less, ideally. And usually present that, I'll socialize it with my CEO, who's my direct boss. I usually also try to I always socialize before going into the broader, exec meeting, just so people know what's coming on and they're not totally surprised by it. I have a very great partnership with our CFO. So he's usually one of the first ones I pitch ideas to in case I do need some type of investment, but I generally try to start with little to no investment in terms of money. It probably comes with time. And then I provide that as a read ahead a couple of days before exec meeting. Then we go and we'll have the discussion. Here's what I pose it up front. Here's what I'm looking for. hey, I'm looking for consensus, or I'm looking for this in this meeting, and we'll have that discussion, in the exec meeting. And that's generally how it's working for us. I've done a lot of trial and error. And this I find is what works best for the group that I'm dealing with. That might look different and has looked different in other organizations. Like, this is where HR people leaders is where you gotta, if you're not like, with L&D, you might be reporting up to your HR leader. You might not be the person making the case, but this is where you really need to help out your HR leader, have the right information, or go in with them, but building that really strong partnership with your execs, but with your business leaders, and knowing really well, like, what are the business priorities, so you can find that alignment. Because I think that's the way you're really going to get buy-in at the end of the day.
I love it. You know what? It's great. I love that you said is build partnership or build a coalition. And I don't think Sean's going to like my answer here, but buy-in is not only financial. Buy-in is not about financial commitment. I know we're talking about the value of having financial commitment, but I really do believe buy-in is mostly behavioral. Buy-in does not start with money. It starts with influence. And I cannot stress the value of influence. To me, it is the most important thing that you require to actually make your program successful. To me, buy-in is definitely active and not passive. Buy-in does not only mean the CEO approves your budget. It means they sponsor your programs. They reinforce the value of your programs in every business meeting. And they are the first in attendance when learning is happening. They are your loudest ally and your strongest advocate. They model learning as a behavior for the organization. And I really, really do believe that when the CEO is in the room, the senior leadership will come to the room. And the saying, I always say, if my boss is in the room, I'm in the room. So if you want people in the learning rooms, then you have to make sure the leadership is in the room and is advocating for other people's presence in the room. So I'd say buy-in is influence, definitely before investment. That's why there's value in building a coalition, starting with the executive team and cascading down to senior leadership. Honestly, to make a long answer short, it takes a village, but it starts with the village chief. So to me, it's not about the finance component, it's about the influence component. If you're saying learning is important for you and valuable for you as an organization, are you actually being present and advocating for that learning? Advocacy is not the job of the talent development person. We're the one who are executing. We're the one who are planning. We're the one who are ensuring it happens. But it's the executive team who have to be your loudest ally.
Yeah, and Sean, it feels like you've been a pretty loud ally at Indeed for a lot of initiatives, but any final thoughts before we wrap?
No, I really have nothing to add to that. I think it was perfectly summed up there. You need to form a coalition. You need to get buy-in. If you don't, it's not about the money. It's about, whether you're going to be supported in the process, and whether people are aligned in the efforts that you're trying to do. If they're not aligned in what you're trying to accomplish, you're going to fail before you start.
Well, Jay, Sean, Sarika, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate your time, and thank you for everyone for showing up. And we'll be in touch soon with a recording and a TLDR page. So thanks again, and have a great rest of your day.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks
Take
a
care.
lot. Great. Bye.